from plastic to paper and sustainable packaging in games. So I will just give a short introduction on packaging in the games industry, and then we'll hand over to you, Natalie, and then we have like a short Q&A session. Yeah, I'm Maria Wagner. I'm the Managing Director of the Sustainable Games Alliance. And as already Valtteri said before, we are a cooperative, a nonprofit cooperative, which is very important because we're governed by our members. And our goal is to decarbonize the games industry. And we are at the moment developing a self-regulation framework for the global games industry and help spread knowledge and best practices when it comes to emission reduction. I mean, this is also one of the reasons why we are having this meetup here today. And when it comes to packaging in the games industry, of course, it is important to talk about the video game packaging. We have a lot of merch packaging going on as well, but today we focus more on the video game packaging. So it's basically, when you have your game and it's being put on display in a shop, or it's basically used to safekeep the game. And in former times, actually, paperboard or cardboard packaging was used on the side of plastic. So it is just like now that more and more in the newer times, we switched completely to plastic. And the known CD cases and this DVD keep cases. The good thing is that in 2020, we surpassed the sales of physical copies with digital sales. So this is in general like a really, really good development when it comes to that. Of course, there were a lot of conversations about owning your game, but we will skip that. Okay, why do we talk about packaging? And why does it maybe make sense to switch to cardboard and paper packaging? If we look at the use of plastic, the problem there is that most of 90% of plastics are made from fossil fuels, and only and 44% of all of this plastic is used for packaging. That's why it's very important to address it. And in Europe, if we really only focus on Europe, we have a 46% recycling rate of this plastic. But here we only talk about Europe. If we look at these numbers globally, they're way more down, way more down. So the recycling rate is way lower. And the problem is, of course, with everything which is not recycled, it gets, on the one hand, burned, which causes emissions. And of course, if it ends up in landfills, it causes even more pollution. Yeah. And these numbers are actually even very good looking numbers. There are other numbers which show a way lower trend of recycling. Okay, and in comparison, cardboard, of course, the problem there is that it's still made of trees, right? So that's something we have to keep in mind. The good thing is, though, trees grow. And also a good thing is that in Europe, 86% of cardboard packaging is recycled, which is great. And also to keep in mind, if it's burned or if it ends up in landfills, it causes less emission. And if we take all numbers into account, basically we can say that if it comes to packaging, plastic has a 12 times higher emission rate compared to cardboard. That's why I think your case is especially interesting. And this is also the time when I would like to hand over to you, Natalie.
So thank you, Maria, for the introduction and for inviting us to present to you our sustainable packaging journey for Football Manager from plastic to paper. We're very happy to be here.
Thank you.
So I'm sure some of you are familiar with SEGA, but for those of you less familiar, just confirming that we were founded in 1960, and since then we've been a global force in the interactive entertainment business for 65 years. We chose to retire from the hardware business back in 2003, but since then we've continued to publish software, video games across multiple first-party formats, both online and in-store. Just to touch upon some of our key IP, so as well as Football Manager, which we're going to talk about today, other key IP for SEGA include Sonic the Hedgehog, Total War, Yakuza, Persona, and Two Point franchise. We operate as a global publishing business with regional expertise, and we have offices in Tokyo, London, and California. A little bit about myself before we move on. So I'm Natalie, otherwise known as Nat, and I'm VP of Operations here at SEGA Europe, and I oversee publishing operations and creative services teams within the organisation. I've worked at SEGA now for over 20 years, and my current remit includes physical manufacturing and logistics across EMEA, and I oversee digital storefronts for first parties globally for all of our SEGA IP. I joined way back in November 2004, just as the very first Football Manager 2005 launched into retail. And fun fact, I've worked on every iteration of physical packaging for Football Manager since. And namely why I'm here, I led the charge on SEGA's environmental and sustainability packaging initiative. And obviously, while I'm here to represent SEGA, it's worth calling out that Claudia Candiotto has recently joined as one of SEGA's newest hires. She's joined us as a group head of sustainability and ESG. And personally, for me, it's a great hire because we've never had dedicated resource within SEGA before. So I, for one, am very happy to have Claudia on board.
I'm going to speak a little bit about the SI Sports Interactive element. We're a studio that's fully owned by SEGA. We were acquired in 2006, but we'd been making football management games before that. And I guess one of the things we'll come on to is that 20-year history brings a lot of fandom and a lot of expectation. And so as we go forward on that, it's about satisfying those players. Me personally, I've been at Sports Interactive 7 years, but I've been in the games industry since the mid-90s, worked on a lot of packaging. And I remember the original cardboard era, but what people forget is that was a big box format and that had very high shipping costs, few boxes on pallets, a lot of articulated lorries driving across Europe delivering products. So even though it was card, it was probably quite uneco there. I report to a studio director, Miles Jacobson, who drives the strategy of the studio. He's a very progressive leader, very ambitious in doing good and doing the right things. So we've always had a focus on what we could do more of and considering that bigger picture. And part of my everyday role is to work with people like Natalie, Claudia, and people at SEGA to get the very best from the studio and the publishing strategy. Football Manager, for those who don't know it, it's a simulation, a very, very deep and rich simulation. We try and deliver every year the latest information on players, teams, leagues, rules, formats, and everything. And we're a hobby game. People play us for hundreds of hours every year, deeply. Our play times are incredible. So when it comes to kind of delivering that experience, we're talking with a fan base that's been with us for a very long time and have very high expectations. So I guess just to give us some, so you heard from Natalie that we had started publishing Football Manager series in 2005. We were always PC first, and we were quite an early embracer of digital. We made our sort of wholesale move to Steam in 2012, and we really tried very hard to move our audience to digital. Fiscally, it's attractive. There's a much higher margin. From an operations perspective, we could do just-in-time delivery. And obviously, we were also patching and updating the product. So we were already into an audience that was used to being in a digital environment. However, despite our best efforts to even market people away and really not concentrate on our retail sales, our audience remained persistently stubborn in going and buying physical packages. And at some point, roughly around 2018, we stopped the idea that we could remove physical completely and actually accept it as an important part of our offering. Our consumers wanted it, they were persistent in buying it. And so rather than not deliver on that promise, how could we do that in a much better way? So Miles picked up the phone to Natalie, and the next things happened.
Yeah, so just to start the story, this slide just really confirms that historically all iterations of Football Manager from the first retail launch in 2005 through to 2019 were shipped in the traditional industry standard plastic Amore case. And it was only really as we started to plan for Football Manager 2020 did we start to work on the joint developer and publisher initiative to consider impact to environment and a proposed change in direction for packaging. So with physical sales in mind for 2020, we wanted to think about how we were going to minimise our impact on the environment, namely with considerations around our carbon footprint, sustainability, recyclability, and overall pollutant use. So in order to consider the change and propose the change, we needed to reflect on those components already at play, which included in the traditional industry standard case, paper inlay, plastic case, disc, paper manual, and the seller wrap. So next was discussing how we challenge the status quo. Do we really need a plastic case and tray? Understanding what retailers really need. Understanding if we could hold on to the premium feel. We know that consumers like tangibility and collectability. So, would it look premium? Would it still have shelf appeal? Could it still be ranged? Would it be robust and secure enough to ship without damage? And could we use recycled as well as recyclable materials? So this led us onto the various stages of bringing the project, or the product, should I say, to life. So those stages included feedback from retail and distribution. So we needed to lead initial conceptual conversations with distribution and retail to understand whether there would be any issues with regards to ranging, on shelf in store, whether there'd perhaps be any impact to returns. And then, as we touched upon before, just considering thoughts around collectability for the consumer. We then had to lead conversations with suppliers. So we chose to work with a trusted printer to come up with a conceptual design, as well as understand impact to assembly lead times with our suppliers, and then cartonisation and logistics. We then proceeded to a sampling stage. We needed to trial design. We needed to discuss and look at board type and board weight, and again, cartonisation configuration. Additional considerations that we discussed at the time were obviously impact to cost of goods, assembly, and then lead times. It's worth noting that there isn't an automatic or an automated assembly line for this style of packaging. It is manual assembly. We then proceeded to a testing stage. So not only did we need to consider the board packaging and any transit damages, we needed to think about impact to returns, but we also needed to test the integrity of the disc to ensure it would still run with no defects. So historically, we've always produced PC on a DVD-ROM, which is generally more robust than, let's say, a Blu-ray disc. But we needed to work with a testing house to perform various drop testing to prove out that theory. And then finally, once we'd come up with a prototype and we trialed the product for Football Manager 2020, we then went back to retail to understand their feedback, impact to returns, and general consumer sentiment. So this is just to recap really where we started with the old style Amray case. And then this is where we landed. So where we landed was a fully recyclable solution, which included a 4-page digipack made from 100% recycled and recyclable cardboard, along with 100% recycled and recyclable manual. All of the printing uses water and vegetable inks apart from the disc, which is recyclable via specialists. And then the whole package is shrink wrapped in widely recyclable LDPE. So that is where we landed for FM20. At the time, we went out with some strong B2B comms with distribution, confirming our position to move to the 100% recycled packaging. There was a slight change to the dimensions, which we did call out, but they were the same as the existing plastic case. And we deliberately kept the spine width for consistency with the old plastic style packaging.
So I'll just jump in here. In terms of a campaign, we wanted to really make the most of this innovation and to try and encourage others to adopt it. So we're very lucky at Football Manager. You know, our audience are football fans. We're very tightly integrated into the football community. At the time, there was a very famous star player who played for Arsenal, the French national team, Hector Bellerin. And he was an advocate for sustainability and eco. And so he generously donated his time and his network and connections to help sort of spread the message. So we used him as the poster child to the campaign, if you like. And we posted on our own socials and network through the video games industry. Our trade body, Yuki, in the UK, did a lot of activity. And because of the relationship that we have in football, we were able to be picked up on a number of sports platforms. And so, you know, just show some of the online coverage here that we're getting, some national newspapers, some specialist areas. The French connection helped us get far in France. And yeah, you know, a sort of big effort there. I think that is my last one.
Thanks, Matt. So recapping where we landed post the trial, we had the support of our environmental compliance agency, Valpac, and with them, we were able to look at the data and confirm that we had saved 20 tonnes of plastic and we're using less fuel for transport, reducing pollutants and raising general awareness for environmental change. There was a small cost increase of 22 euro cents, and that was based on the volume and the data at the time of the first iteration of 2020. So impacts of FM20 and FM21. So once the trial was complete, we asked Valpac to perform a life cycle assessment so we could understand the impact to CO2 savings and our water use. And as this slide shows, comparatively, while there was an increase in water footprint, there was a reduction in carbon footprint of 39.5%. So next steps. So obviously we had COVID, and due to COVID and the additional constraints around the crisis, we chose for FM21 to just rinse and repeat the model. But then we were reevaluating components for FM22 as we wanted to improve sustainability efforts even further. So that's when we took the iteration to a new level. So FM22, for this iteration, it saw us lose the disc for the first time, which whilst deemed positive, we needed to ensure that there was still a value add proposition for the consumer. And so we chose to add a 20-page notebook to add a bit of weight to the physical packaging. So the result showed an increase in water footprint, and that was due to the addition of the notebook, but again, a higher reduction in the carbon footprint due to losing the disc. So then on to the FM23 and FM24 iterations. So we chose at this point to lose the notebook, and we chose to move from a 4-panel digipack to a 6-panel digipack. Again, a mix of value perception in having the extra panel, but also we had more information that we needed to get onto box. So the journey that we took has then, since with this iteration, has now resulted in an overall carbon footprint reduction of 73%, which is a pretty incredible result. And the water footprint now remains flat against FM19. So as you've seen, we've evolved the sustainability efforts along the way and across the iterations of Football Manager. But as I touched upon earlier, the consumers do like tangibility and collectability and shelf appeal. So as I touched upon earlier, we did deliberately keep the spine the same thickness as the plastic case so that collectors could keep that on-shelf consistency for the brand and for the product. This slide shows a snapshot of our 5-year journey with the packaging and progression of the environmental impact and data. It's obviously a largely very positive result. Not expecting you to digest all this data now. We will obviously share this deck and this slide so that you can digest at your leisure. So what happened next and what's happened since? So since Football Manager, we have rolled out the initiative to all of our other SEGA studios and products for PC. So now sustainable packaging is the new norm for all of our standard PC packaging and has been since 2020. We have been lobbying first-party support where possible, and we joined the Plastics and Packaging Working Group with Playing for the Planet. And very recently had some first-party representation on that call. And certainly Microsoft have been very cooperative and very supportive of all of the efforts that we've done with Football Manager. And they did actually approve us a pilot test on their platform with sustainable packaging. At the time, this particular title, Endless Dungeon, included a disc. But since then, Microsoft have actually trialled their own first-party sustainable packaging pilot. And I understand that there's more to follow on that. I think the upshot was that it worked on a lower volume, but it would need some work if it was to be rolled out on a broader, larger volume and scale. So more to follow as we continue to work very closely with Microsoft. And then just generally, in terms of SEGA, we are continuing to explore and advance our sustainable initiatives. We're looking at a long-term removal of the shrink wrap on our PC titles. I know that, again, Microsoft have confirmed that by the end of this year, they want to remove shrink wrap from all of their game packaging. So we'd like to look and see what we can do on PC and perhaps move towards like a paper seal sticker, because obviously there still is a valuable component within the packaging, which is the Steam code. So we need to make sure it's secure at retail, but we ideally want to lose the use of the plastic. And then we're still progressing supply of board, because, you know, in honesty, we have had some challenges in terms of availability of the 100% recycled board and source of origin. Currently, we're sourcing from a mill in India because there were some sourcing issues and there were some mill closures that we've had to navigate around. And also we've had some issues with shipping some of the board from India, namely as a result of the Suez Canal crisis, and we saw delays. So we've had to, you know, navigate around some of those challenges. So there is things that are still work in progress and things that we're still trying to progress together. So, yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Nat. So we've been talking about PC to this extent because the first parties themselves stipulate how manufacturing is done and what materials are used. And Football Manager was primarily a PC product. I guess since the late teens of the 20s, we've been moving towards a console outlet. And again, we started digital first and digital only. But as we put content that was more interesting for our Asian colleagues in Japan, we then discovered that Japan is still a very physical market, and the requirement from SEGA was to go back to doing boxes. Something we've been trying to move away from and something we were trying to offset, and suddenly we get planted with this big demand for plastic. So we looked at, I guess, solving the potential problem from a different way. If you can't actually change the packaging, is there anything else we could do? And we looked to, sorry, I can't tell if the screen is probably showing this top thing, but we looked at an offset project. Now, Claudia will tell us this doesn't count for any of your metrics or measures if we're going to be officially measured and reporting. But our view, regardless, is that this was a good signal of us being progressive and thinking about what we could do. Probably most people don't do offset carbon buying. It's not something that would be very common. It might seem very scary. Our colleagues at SEGA really facilitated this. And actually, it proves to be a lot simpler and a lot easier than we first expected. First of all, we engaged with a middle party called SEGA. Imagine them as a marketplace like an eBay of carbon credits. And they have their own criteria. They do their own validation of the opportunities that you have. But more importantly, they can advise you on how the carbon is used. We know there are big problems in, say, for example, investing in forestry. First of all, is it really changing behavior, or is it just paying for what people are doing already? But more fundamentally, you know, in conflict zones and border areas, it just takes some petrol and a match, and that carbon is immediately re-released into the environment. And we know that that is going on. So we did look for a project that would try and permanently hold the carbon in a different format, and one which we thought would have an even more added benefit. So this ticked a lot of boxes, not just because it was a fertility project, but also it could be employed in sort of developing and growing nations, and that felt good from a sort of ethics perspective in the studio. In the end, this actually is a much cheaper option than actually changing your packaging. So, you know, maybe this is a first step towards things. I think in both cases, you've seen that there is a cost to doing these things over and above doing on plastic. So really, you've got to look at, can you convert this opportunity for maybe a payback in marketing or brand position or in consumer engagement? So, you know, thinking about that communication strategy has to go hand in hand with, you know, doing pioneering stuff versus the industry. So I'll leave it there. I think that is the last slide, and hand over for questions. Let me stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was like really interesting, especially the numbers. I mean, it has been a lot of work, I think. How long did it take you to, like, from the first idea until, yeah, the first paper package, basically?
So obviously Football Manager is an annual iteration. So we incorporated the brief for conceptual design to execution about 8 months from release date. And during that time, obviously, we worked with Printer to help with the design, accounted for testing, sampling, feedback within that time, and then executed the product. So about 8 months.
Awesome. Sorry that I jumped in right away. I should open it up for the audience. I was just so excited, so I do that now.
I have a question, and thank you for sharing, Matt and Nat. Super interesting. I'm very curious about the tangibility and collectability. You're very sensitive towards it. You also mentioned that you receive feedback from the retailers. What was the feedback from the players or your communities or consumers like? And how did you apply that to the changes you've made or iterations you've made year over year? And there's any other kind of nudging or ways you communicated the changes to them? Because ultimately, to me, it sounds like that it's because they want it that you're making it. But if there's something, if they wanted something else, then you'd maybe be willing to do even less packaging or digitalize it 100% rather than offering the physical copy as you've decided to, despite where you want to take things.
Maybe I'll start. Maybe now
You start, yeah,
different
please, yeah.
perspective. I mean, I think over the many years that we've delivered packages to market, there's always the retailer who's looking for an added value item or something different, and that item then has to be valuable for the player. And the more valuable that item is, then the more you're moving your audience from one retailer to another because they want that extra item. So we had experimented with adding things to boxes. Initially, they were physical things, and then we got clever and came up with some digital things that we might add to the box. But what we came to a conclusion ultimately was we didn't really want to disadvantage any one consumer from having an experience because they chose to buy it from one retailer versus maybe they don't want to buy from that retailer or they can't buy from that retailer. So a couple of years before we embarked on this whole project, we had gone to the one package for all. And really the only difference we were offering for physical and digital was the spine on your shelf. I mean, that literally was coming down because you're having to do a day one update anyway. And to be honest, if you bought digitally, we were doing, I guess what's now called early access. But we had an early access mod on digital. So if you're a digital consumer, you were playing the game earlier anyway. So really the feedback to us was that physical buyers are physical buyers. You can't get them to go digital, even if you give them the game earlier. And why is that? We know it's the collectability. So we get loads of fan posts of people's shelves with the spines and that. And so again, when we come to this project, almost fundamentally was, will the spine hold up? Will it be there? And that's why you see the sort of 6-page solution at the end, because there's nothing inside holding it together. What actually was a bit disappointing, if I'm totally honest, is we got very little feedback. You know, we didn't see a significant change in sales. In fact, sales have been going up in recent years, which again is even more frustrating for someone like me. That actually the availability of packaging is enticing. I mean, maybe it's better distribution and we're getting more impulse, but it is definitely working in terms of being a pick-upable. I think the other thing that's quite fascinating for me is that the physical distribution is in Germany, it's in Italy, it's in Spain. In other words, the regional effect has not changed in the slightest. People are adopting it there. So if there's a shelf to be on that we can be sold on, at least we're selling it with a better package. So yeah, consumers were pretty bland, but then I don't get too disappointed about that. Years and years ago, I was doing some market research studies and reading an article about dog food. And basically, if the dog eats the food, then you can change the formula. So you can reduce the cost of goods and, you know, the dog's still satisfied and the owner sees the dog satisfied and maybe it smells differently or texture's different. But the dog eating it was the most important thing. And for me, our players were eating the dog food. They were buying the package and buying it again and keep going. So yeah, I guess from that perspective, it's like brilliant. We've got rid of the plastic. We're making the, we talked about the 22-cent edition in cost of goods, but you've got a knock-on effect on cheaper transportation as well, because you're getting more boxes in a cart, and maybe the sales team can upsell the volume of units on the back of that. So, you know, the economics are moving around a little bit. So yeah, hopefully that helps answer. But yeah, disappointingly lack of commentary, but no commentary saying, oh, it's an awful idea, we hate it, let's set the world on fire, you've betrayed me. None of that, like completely radio silence. So that was good.
Just maybe to follow up on that, do you think if you would have like a label like comparing different games and the emissions of the production would have helped? Or, I mean, it's also hard to say most likely, but just as a question.
My opinion, and it is an opinion only, every single person who picked up that pack knew instantly that it wasn't plastic and it was probably recycled card and it probably was a better package. Did they think we were doing it to make cheaper cost of goods? Maybe, but I don't think so. I think genuinely people, you know, when they touch the product, they know they're getting something that thought has gone into making it a better thing. And particularly if it's on shelf next to plastic, like next to the shiny plastics, I think ours stand out as an effort not to do that. But Nat, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd agree. I was just going to add to the first question, you know, whilst there wasn't necessarily said impact from consumers as we'd expected, certainly it got very positive press pickup, and certainly just on an operational level, the distributor and retail feedback was positive. And interestingly enough, there was no impact to returns, because we were worried when we moved from plastic to card whether they would have an impact on returns in terms of damages, etc. But that didn't play out, so that was a positive result in that regard.
Valkyrie, do you wanna?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have a small series of questions. So if I may, just to get it right, did I understand right that all the packages were basically made of recycled carbon, the cardboard? Okay. So when you compare the water use figures, does the water figures, are they from the recycling process, or do they also include like the production of the virgin cardboard?
That's a good point. I need to go back and look at my Valpak life cycle assessment, and I'm happy to share that with you. By the way, there's no hidden agenda there. We're happy to share that. So I need to go back and double check that.
To the extent where of what information is included in the assessment, and if the Valpak actually shares the emission factors with Thierry, because that will be the answer to your question, is what is in Valpak's emission factor, and we would have to double check whether they're comfortable in sharing that.
Okay. Would be very interesting to know, because like when we think about the environmental impact of different materials, then obviously like based on scientific like these planetary boundaries, when we think about the production of cardboard, in addition to water use, we maybe should be looking into like land system change and biosphere integrity as well. Like obviously like climate change and the atmospheric carbon is a big issue, and those are always alerting. But when we think about like the overall planetary health, then I think the cardboard production may be touching on more of these planetary boundaries than the production of plastic. So that's why I was just thinking that how encompassive this comparison is, and obviously then like the environmental effect is very different from plastic, so it's not directly comparable, but just to kind of understand where those figures come from and what parts of the process are included. Thanks.
That's a great point. I mean, I have just joined. I think it's a great point. What we also want to just remember is we're measuring what we can, and a lot of those factors that you've just mentioned, there aren't reporting frameworks that we could use to actually measure the impact on those factors. So what's the planetary boundaries is something we should absolutely be aware about. We also know that the most advanced reporting frameworks are currently around greenhouse gases and carbon. And we still have to align on how we report on those, which is the whole point of the SGA. So I think it's a fantastic point, but we're also trying to stick with the framework that is most recognized, and trying to be consistent in what we're capturing there.
Of course. The reason I'm kind of aware of that is because in Finland we have this thing that we used to have a ton of forests everywhere, and just like a few years ago the government was like, hey, we have all these forests, why don't we just use them all? And it has been very unsustainable development for the past couple of years, like regarding everything. So thinking about like trees in terms of like whether they're sustainable source of energy and material, so you have to have some kind of balance there. So just always highlighting that. But yeah, just so you know where I'm coming from.
I completely hear you, and it's pretty interesting that in Finland's strategy they're looking at land use as part of their carbon neutrality commitment. So let's see how that goes. But on SEGA's point, that is why the team is using 100% recycled cardboard. So to avoid the use of any virgin materials, and hopefully reducing the impact on these other boundaries by not participating in deforestation acts.
Yes.
I think this is like really a great example why we need global standards, and why we think it's also like important that we not only agree in Europe on how to measure these things, but like really globally, and analyze the like entire value chain. Because also like if we start thinking about like producing this cardboard package, where do we start to count the emissions? like, do we start to count the emissions already sourcing the material and comparing that then with the fossil fuels which are extracted? Because this is exactly something where we need to get together and find a common understanding. Otherwise, it will be really, really hard to improve the situation, and then also avoid greenwashing, because of course otherwise we can just throw in a number and we don't know what it says. So and
this is very important point of view, I think, because like it's also like how the public conversation about these topics is usually kind of blurred with these arguments that are kind of sound like sustainable, but they are not consistent in that sense. So for example, talking about this use of forests in Finland, there are like many politicians who argue that, well, we have the same amount of land with forests as before, but like when they are basically just fields of trees with very low biodiversity, it's not the same as having lots of old forests and so on. So it's very important to kind of have the standards, so we talk about the same thing and you can kind of argue around it. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to if you can answer my questions in more detail, and I sent everybody a LinkedIn request, so happy to be on board.
Thank you.
awesome.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
So thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.